Our next speaker is Hans von Spakovsky, who is the author of Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. Hans von Spakovsky is an attorney and former member of the Board of Advisors for the Federal Election Commission. He's an expert on voter fraud and co-wrote with John Fund the recent book, Who's Counting? How Fraudsters and Bureaucrats Put Your Vote at Risk. Spakovsky is a staff member of the Heritage Foundation, frequently speaking and writing on elections. Please welcome Hans von Spakovsky.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying your stay here at the Heritage Foundation. Well, 2 years ago, John Fund and I, John Fund, by the way, works for National Review. He's our national affairs correspondent, where I'm also a contributor. We wrote a book on election integrity and voter fraud. And in June, we came out with a second book, this one, called Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. And it's basically about how Eric Holder has run the Justice Department for the past almost 6 years. And I can tell you that it's something that ought to concern every American. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some things kind of at the 30,000-foot level, but I'm going to talk about why you should be concerned about this. The Justice Department is probably the most powerful executive branch agency on the domestic side that we have. The prosecutors who work there can break, bankrupt, and put in prison any American. And if they have the willingness to abuse the law, they can do a lot of harm. And I can tell you that that's exactly what's been going on now for a number of years. I used to work at the Justice Department. I spent 4 years there, actually as a career lawyer, not a political appointee, during the Bush administration. And I can tell you that the people who I have talked to there, we have sources still inside the department, tell us that Eric Holder has politicized the department in a way that it has never been politicized before. One veteran of the department, a career civil service lawyer who was hired during the Clinton administration, told us that Eric Holder was the worst attorney general since Jonathan Mitchell under Richard Nixon. Mitchell went to jail, you may recall. But that actually Holder makes Mitchell look like an amateur. And part of what has happened throughout the department is they have been filling the ranks of the Justice Department, the career ranks. Now remember, the career civil service system is supposed to be a system that hires people without politics, professionals, and what they have been doing is filling the ranks with their political cronies and people from liberal advocacy groups in Washington. There was an Inspector General report that was released last year that got no attention in the press. Now, if it had been the Bush administration, you would have seen it on the front pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times. This Inspector General report talked about how in the hiring process for career lawyers in the Civil Rights Division, which is where I used to work, the division had overlooked and refused to hire lawyers who'd applied for jobs with sterling credentials from some of the biggest law firms in the country, and had hired almost all of their lawyers exclusively from 5 liberal advocacy organizations, including, by the way, the ACLU. So that tells you the mindset that is there. And, you know, when I was at the Justice Department, we saw the law as the fence within which we had to operate. The department today doesn't see the law as a fence. Their view is they want to help the president change us into the progressive utopia that the president has the vision for, and the law is just a tool to do that. And if they can ignore the law, bend the law, change the law, twist the law to do that, they will do it. Now, in this book, we talk about everything from national security, you know, really big, important topics, to other areas, but why should you be concerned about this? Well, I'll tell you, all of you are either in college, about to graduate, about to go into the workforce. Well, let me give you an example of just how crazy they are at the Justice Department today. Last year, the head of the education section of the Civil Rights Division, who had been hired into a career slot from the NAACP, and who once told the United Nations at a forum that she believed that in the United States, school officials should be able to assign students based on their race, religion, and immigration status. They sent a letter to colleges throughout the country last year setting up a new standard that they said colleges had better follow if they didn't want to get sued by the Justice Department on claims of sexual harassment. Now, I don't belittle the importance of making sure that sexual harassment doesn't occur, but the rules on that have been established by the Supreme Court are pretty clear, which is for someone to be guilty of sexual harassment, they have to engage in severe behavior that is objectionable to a reasonable person. So if you're a super sensitive individual who gets offended because someone asks you out on a date, that's not sexual harassment. But that's the new rule that the Justice Department said colleges have to follow. They said that any unwelcome conduct, that's literally from the letter, any unwelcome conduct should be considered sexual harassment. So I'm telling you literally that if you ask someone out on a date and they are offended by it, under this new rule you could be brought up on sexual harassment charges at your college. Not only that, but they were extremely upset over the fact that many colleges give due process rights to students. You know, this is America. You know, we believe in due process. You're not considered guilty just because someone accuses you of something. And do you know they actually complained in this letter about colleges having appeal rights. So if you're accused of this, and there's a finding against you and you want to appeal it, they complained about the fact that you can appeal that. And they also apparently wanted colleges to put in the kind of procedures that, you may recall in Alice in Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts? Remember she said, you know, lop off their heads before there's a trial? Well, that's apparently the procedure that the Justice Department wants to put in, because they actually complained in the letter and said that colleges should consider taking disciplinary actions like expulsion, suspension, before someone's appeal has been exhausted. Now, that can affect you directly. Another way it can affect you directly is I can tell you that there is a racialist attitude at the Justice Department. And that racialist attitude is completely opposite of the way it was when I was there, which was we believed in the race neutrality of our discrimination laws. In other words, for example, in the voting area, you know, you can't be intimidated when you try to vote. You can't be harassed when you try to vote on the basis of race. And that protects everyone. It doesn't matter what your race is. If you're being threatened, intimidated, or harassed because of your race when you try to vote, that is illegal under federal law. That's not the way this Justice Department views that. They believe it only protects people of a certain race. And they have the same view towards, for example, employment discrimination. If you're discriminated against and you are white or Asian, they don't really care about that. If you're discriminated against because you're black, then they will go after that kind of a case and they will charge it. Anyone who doubts that, just take a look at what happened in 2008 in Philadelphia when members of the new Black Panther Party stood outside of a polling place harassing voters trying to get in, yelling racial epithets at them in black paralegal uniforms with nightsticks. And what did the administration do the moment they came in? They dismissed that lawsuit, even though they had already won it. Something that I'd never heard of in the entire history of the Justice Department. The Justice Department had already won the lawsuit because the Black Panther Party didn't bother to file an answer. They could have had a default judgment against them, and the administration dismissed the suit. That tells you something about the attitude there and why it's important that we be concerned about it. The President picked the Attorney General that he wanted. They first met, by the way, back in 2000.